The Democracy Forum is a not-for-profit organization founded in 2009 under the patronage of Baroness Nicholson of Winterbourne. Its principal goal was to work for the furtherance of democracy, peace and the rule of law in order to counter religious fundamentalism and intolerance in our global community. In an increasingly fractured world, this goal continues to be the driving force behind all of the Forum's activities. Lord Charles Bruce is the current president of the Forum.
Do you believe it's possible for the United States to achieve its national security objectives in Afghanistan as long as Pakistan provides support and sanctuary to groups such as the Taliban and the Haqqani network?
I do not believe that we can attain our objectives in Afghanistan, Chairman, unless we materially change the behavior of Pakistan.
And have you got thoughts on how you do that?
Chairman, well, it will require a broad approach to do it. I think it's unacceptable that you hit the key issue. It's unacceptable that Pakistan provides sanctuary, and we ought to bring the full weight of the U.S. government and our coalition partners on Pakistan to ensure that they do not provide the sanctuary that they have provided historically to groups like Haqqani and the Taliban.
Are you satisfied now with the rules of engagement which have been changed with the new administration?
Chairman, I am, and I had a long conversation with General Nicholson and NATO over the weekend to ensure that he also had the same degree of confidence. Secretary Mattis has spoken to General Nicholson in the past week to make sure he's confident that he has the rules of engagement that allow him to engage any enemy that is a threat to the Afghan government, our mission, coalition forces, or U.S. personnel.
Is some of it reminiscent of our rules of engagement during the Vietnam conflict?
Well, Chairman, they may have been. I can assure you today that we have the rules of engagement necessary to advance our objectives in Afghanistan and to protect the force as well.
Very much. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, I'd like to especially thank Lord Bruce, Mr. Singh, and Tom Deegan, and the entire Democracy Forum staff for inviting me to participate with this outstanding panel at this very important forum. And let me start out by saying that the words that I speak today are all my own. They don't represent my university, they surely don't represent the United States government, and they surely don't represent Donald Trump. What I plan to do today is to talk about the explicit question that was raised by the forum on cross-border terrorism and the implications of Trump's plan. Trump does not have a strategy because there's no end game, and I don't think Trump understands what a strategy is. And let me start by suggesting that the first thing that I say to my students in both my introductory and my advanced Afghan seminars is that the only truism about Afghanistan is there's no truths. The new US-Afghan, quote, policy stop cross-border terror. By the way, the answer to that question relative to me is a very, very big no. America and NATO basically went into Afghanistan with an extremely naive, if not basic, misunderstanding of what Afghanistan was all about. They had a very good idea about what the Kabulis wanted, but they never really answered or asked the rural Afghans that make up 80% of the population what they wanted. So our general lack of knowledge of understanding the nuances and the multi-layers, especially in rural Afghanistan, from day one, I believe, damned our engagement. The Afghan population, quite frankly, has not been secured. The Taliban right now are the strongest since they've been since 2001. Taliban insurgents, wrapped in the narrative of jihad, now control more land and form of districts since any time in 2001. Of the 407 districts in Afghanistan, of the 34 provinces, only 231 are under government control or influence as late as August of this year. 54 districts are either under insurgent, explicit control or influence. The next point I want to suggest is that violence is so bad in parts of Afghanistan right now, you might have read last week that the Red Cross clinics are shutting all of their doors in the country. Now, they did this once before in 2008, so this is a very bad sign. War data once public, and this is the headline, is now censored by the U.S. military. The American Military Command in Afghanistan has decided to keep secret key figures related to the growth and progress and local security forces, redacting the numbers at the behest of the Afghan officials from the latest report by the government watchdog, our special investigator, Special Inspector General for Afghan Reconstruction. Now, why do you think that's the case? We're now classifying the number of Afghan national security, casualties, numbers under arms, and other data. That's a clear indicator to me that something is very, very wrong. The CIA military force is multiplying their Afghan objectives and are now running operations all over Afghanistan. I think this also could prove to be disastrous for a wide variety of reasons. Kabul was paying, I know this for a fact, Kabul was paying Kandahar for 2,800 police forces. We knew that there were only 1,700 police on the ground. So where's that money going? Kill statistics have now become the new measure of success, just like in Vietnam. Because we're no longer fighting counterinsurgency, we're no longer doing nation building, so you're starting to hear Nicholson talk about body bags, just like Vietnam. But you're never going to kill or capture your way to victory in Afghanistan. The Taliban are energized, and they'll fight for generations. We cannot kill off the Taliban. We have to have a political solution. You know, I don't consider Pakistan an ally. I consider Pakistan an enemy. I recognize they have very different South Asian goals in the United States, but that doesn't excuse Pakistan from directly and indirectly killing American and NATO forces as well as many Afghan forces. The United States has spent significantly more money in real dollars in Afghanistan than it did to rebuild Europe after World War II and the Marshall Plan. In my opinion, Trump's speech was an incoherent wish list of that was unmoored in political reality or principle. While not supporting democracy or human rights, he stated the U.S. demands reform as a condition for its continued assistance. But what reforms? Not one reform was mentioned. They weren't specified. Trump's speech, as all of his speeches do, left many more questions answered, or many more questions than answers. An indicator of how desperate the situation presently is in Afghanistan is that in October, the United States aircraft dropped 653 bombs, the most of any month since 2012. Nobody can win this war through the air. Plus, this plays directly, I would argue, in the Taliban's hand, because the Taliban's military strategy has always been one thing: force the United States and NATO into making mistakes. You know, let a maneuver element chase around a bunch of madrasa students, let them go into a village and just pray that a 500-pounder comes and goes astray and kills an Afghan innocent, a woman or a child. Because the Taliban know that then Kabul, NATO, and the United States has lost that village forever. So I'm very concerned about this significant increase in air sorties. Now, I know this is a touchy subject with some Afghans, but Afghanistan doesn't have a prime minister. Yet, to quote Trump in a speech, he studied Afghanistan up and down and from all angles. Overall, I think the speech basically reflected moving the deck chairs around on the Afghan Titanic. The only solution to this conflict is political, and here his talk was completely vacuous. With all of this said, I did like his statements concerning Pakistan and India. Pakistan, as suggested earlier, has been an extremely unreliable ally in Afghanistan and has long sponsored terrorists, and India could serve as a useful role, especially if Trump finally gets a U.S. ambassador in the country. Pakistan, who has never really been an ally relative to Afghanistan and are responsible, as I suggested earlier, for directly and indirectly killing our servicemen, and for the most part, we've tolerated this. In summary, Trump's slight adjustment will never bring stability to Afghanistan, a country whose history and culture are replete with rebellious people that are unwilling to support a strong central government. America's failure to adjust strategy based on this reality is a principal cause to Afghanistan Afghanistan's instability. To summarize his plan and speech, in military terms, Trump's long-awaited Afghan strategy looks very much like the old one, but on the diplomatic front, he did take a risk in confronting an unruly Pakistan. But then Pakistan could pat him on his back, send a couple of nice tweets, and he might change his position. That's what I'm worried about. I'm totally in favor of turning up the pressure on Pakistan, from cutting military aid to stripping them of allied status or declaring them a state sponsor of terrorism, which they are. But I worry that Trump has a tendency to change, as I mentioned, his mind on a whim. But the biggest stick may be the outreach to India. The United States has always encouraged Indian involvement in Afghanistan, but it has been careful not to step on Pakistan toes. I think this should change. I don't believe the U.S. any longer needs to be careful about Pakistan sensitivity. I can't believe, and I'm sure many in the room cannot believe, that Pakistan just last week released under house arrest Hafiz Saeed, who was the mastermind of the Mumbai attack. I just can't believe it. This likely will be the hardest aspect of the strategy to achieve. Both of Trump's immediate predecessors also made overtures to regional approaches to Afghanistan, and neither delivered. Pakistan cannot have it both ways, and the U.S. has a great deal of leverage to use or help if necessary to force Islamabad to change its ways. But we can't solve Afghanistan without Pakistan, and you can't solve Pakistan without India. This ripple effect is a key to achieving a sustainable solution in my mind. As long as groups such as the Taliban, Al-Qaeda, Haqqani Network find safe haven in Pakistan, and Lord knows they do, and the state supports terrorist proxies, this must stop, and it's time to turn the pressure up a notch. Pakistan would greatly benefit from the Taliban in charge of the Afghan government. At a minimum, they would have a friendly government besides its border and a hostile government towards India. Even in the case of Afghan instability, Pakistan's interest is secured given the Pak military's fear of growing Indian influence. Many people in urban areas of Afghanistan increasingly favor India over Pakistan and highly appreciate Indian involvement in Afghanistan. And I know I do, and I think many Americans also do.